Welcome to today's episode of Cerius Leadership, a weekly webinar for business leaders by business leaders. Today's topic centers around optimizing your operations for scalability. To lead that conversation, I want to introduce the president of Cerius, Kristen McAllister.
Thank you, Chris. I'm so excited. I think that Peter and I started this conversation probably years ago, and it's now culminating in 35-minute webinar. So we will do our best. But thank you for joining us today, Peter. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen.
Chris mentioned we do have a LinkedIn post. I want to use the time to have Peter talk about his area of expertise versus going into his incredible background. So please feel free to click on Peter's name on the post, go check out his background, connect with him. Probably one of the most amazing, accomplished individuals that I have met. And really, one of the reasons I think what got us started on this topic, Peter, was all the discussions that I was having with clients around my business is growing. I've got to stop customizing all my processes. We've got to stop. We're making the same mistakes over and over. We keep reinventing the wheel. And I know that you've scaled operations so many times that you actually have a playbook on how to do it. So I'm glad that you're here to share some of your insights, your thoughts. For those on the call who also have a playbook, maybe you'll be supplementing it, or you want to connect with Peter and compare notes or find out how to optimize your company better. Again, invite anyone to join us afterwards or during the call on the LinkedIn post. All right, Peter, it's all you. We're going to get this started off. I love that it's a catchphrase, optimizing operations for scalability. We use a lot of those in what we do. So let's use a ground wire. You can get us started with, what does that mean? Why would a company want to optimize their operations, and what does that look like?
Yes. Thank you, Kristen, for the kind intro. I'll start by saying poor operations and complex operations eat your focus, right? And if you're focused on some complex process from the Paleolithic era, you're not going to get to the stuff that matters, the strategy stuff. And we all tell ourselves every day, a million good ideas, I know how to do this. But then some of us get bogged down in navigating these complex processes that have existed for a long time, that are there because they've always been there. And people have kind of like grown into a comfort zone. And sometimes it takes an outside person to point that out. And sometimes there's a reason to do that, an acquisition, an exit, something like that. And to put that into context, this morning, when I went on my LinkedIn, the top post was from Pilot. Pilot's a professional services company. It's backed by Jeff Bezos. And the caption was, inefficient companies will not get funding in 2024, right? So even there, just in financing, we've all had a free ride, but as we know, profitability and optimization is key as an evaluation criteria for the broader business environment out there right now.
Love it. So whether I'm looking to sell or not, get money, there's something that hits the bottom line when I'm more efficient. And I love that you mentioned, I was just talking to a CEO last week who said, on a daily basis, I'm getting pulled in to solve problems. I know that this shouldn't be happening. Talk me through how optimizing the operations, or maybe how inefficient operations, are causing the business owner CEO to get pulled in so often, and why, when we start addressing the elephant in the room with those operations, what's the outcome we're expecting?
I thought about my focus in some of these situations, and sometimes it can be up to 75% firefighting. And I remember some of the solutions I encountered for firefighting is throw more hours or more expensive resources to placate a customer that's otherwise very upset, right, by your poor process that they eventually have to navigate, because that's how you interface with them. And so the objective becomes so clear that that you need to optimize those processes in order to free up the focus that you almost can't avoid it. And then if you draw the parallel to say that anything that I do in that optimization is going to drop directly into my bottom line, and we're going to talk about how do you pull from an initial assessment and a hypothesis through to your P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, financial forecast, right? The incentive is too much to look away, right? Once you kind of like go down that road and you have the dollars in your mind, right? If you're not inspired to do that, you probably should be an artist or a farmer or something like that, right?
So if I'm not inspired by making more money, I'm in the wrong business as a business owner.
If you're in business, doing business, it's not always the objective, right? There are B Corps, etc., but it is the measuring stick of success, right? The measuring stick of success is how much money does the company make.
As you go in and you work with business owners, and really another thing that I hear is, as I've built out my operations myself as a business owner, I've personally built out every piece of it. And I've built it like Lego blocks, not knowing what it's going to look like in the end. And I've layered on block by block, piece by piece. What does that end up looking like?
A Jenga tower. Yeah, it looks like a Jenga tower. Yeah. So it's great that you mentioned that example. I know in some of the past conversations, we've talked about what people think are special, right? Because you spend so much time thinking through these problems, sometimes because you didn't have a reference that these are normal problems, right? That this has been done before, that somebody else has tackled this in the history of humankind. You are going to invent something new. You are going to reinvent the wheel. And you're going to end up with something that you love, right? And that you think is the best. And so to be told that there may be another way is not a great thing to hear, right? The amount of times I've heard people say, my accounts payable process is unique. And my example, my way of solving it is so good, nobody can beat that. AP is, I've never come across unique accounts payables, right? People say the same about inventory management, customer hierarchies, freight lane estimation, all those things. So I think until somebody puts an alternative in front of you, says here is a best-in-class way to treat your issue or process or complex, and here is how much time you could save. And we'll talk about how to estimate that time and value, right? It really is hard to understand that may not be the best way to do it. So understanding what the alternative is, the best in class, opens up that realm of possibility of how much you could gain from optimizing that process.
I love that you mentioned that it is measurable and we can have a hypothesis to say, are we doing this in the right way? Are we getting the outcomes? And we will get there. I want to go to next that playbook. As you mentioned, there's nothing unique.
No.
There is not a single instance that you've done, especially as an expert in supply chain, inventory management, e-commerce. You've run that. I think, how many companies did you work with at PwC where you'd walk in, you'd analyze them, you'd put the process in place, and there was no surprising you.
PwC state hundreds, right? And your game face that you put on in a meeting when somebody kind of tells you about their special process, maintaining that game face gets better the more you realize that the process is not unique, right? There's an inverse statistical inference there. So yes, you do, and I think everybody here probably has their preferred method of doing something. And if something better comes along, or you learn if something better, you're going to replace that in your playbook, right? So my playbook is having its 25th anniversary, right, on the 17th of January, right, which is tomorrow, which is the day I started working. It really has just kind of like been an iteration of what I've come across, not just in what I've done or learned from others, but also in benchmark databases, right? Because in a big consultancy, you have access to crazy benchmarks, right? I mean, it's thousands of companies piled in there. So there's no disputing what the art of the possible is, what can be achieved in terms of ROI and, some expense as a percentage of sales. It's all there by industry, by country, by zip code, right? It's incredible. And then I've also cut my experience plus the benchmarks plus best in class with some of the available data out there. We've spoken about where some of those sources are, right? Tier 1 ERP manuals and process listings are amazing resources to just first structure your whole playbook, and secondly, understand what best in class processes is, because to sell their product, they've had to think about all these crazy scenarios that people find themselves in and come up with one or maybe two solutions to address that in a standardized fashion.
I love that you hit on that, and we'll get to that in a moment. Let's start with where do I start with? Whether I am bringing in an outside advisor with that expertise, someone like yourself, many people on this call, or I'm choosing someone in my company to own it. And we'll get to that in a moment. Where's the starting point? What are those first couple of steps that I'm going to walk through in your playbook?
I find that having a short starting point is very important, because these continuous improvement, optimization initiatives, they can stall, like my kid studying for his exam, right? They can be procrastinated for years, right? And be a good idea. And like my favorite analogy is it's like the Loch Ness monster. You hear a lot about it, but you never see it, right? And so I think one of the first places to start is to do an assessment, right? A brief initial assessment with the objective to produce a hypothesis that can then guide all your execution and your implementation and your measurement. In order to do that, one of the first things, and this is basic project management methodology, is to break your work into work streams, right? And then understand what the content is of each of those work streams in terms of process, list out the processes, even if it's just a draft, because you will add and subtract as you go through it. And then start your interview process with those incumbents that manage each of those to set what is called the as-is environment, to set just a basic understanding, a map, a place to start of where this process is right now, so that in the future you can map where it's going to be, the to be, and that you can then, in that gap, understand, right, what the work is, what the different sub-projects are. So that initial assessment, maybe it's 2 days, maybe it's 5 days, is a high-level understanding of the key processes and the key things that could change. And in many cases, the golden question there is asking all those folks, hey, what is the most inefficient process? What's the thing that hurts you most? What do you hate doing when you wake up in the morning, when you think about going to work, right? Those folks know it best. You're just a consultant or an incumbent or somebody from another business unit learning about it, and you just sit quietly and ingest that information. From that comes the assessment and the initial hypothesis to then be detailed and tested.
So as you're going through here's where we're at, how often do you run into no, that's not the way we do it, but that's the way we should be doing it? How are you addressing that? Because that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks that I see with clients is we can't agree on how we should be doing it right now or how it's actually being done.
Oh, yeah. You remind me of a mistake I made when I was very young and very arrogant, right? And I walked into a meeting with 20 accounts payable folks, talking through exactly this process. And I could only sit there for 5 minutes until I said, but that's wrong. You should be doing it like this. And I irritated and lost the whole room. They didn't want to speak with me for weeks, right? Because I was going to need these folks to go through the change, right? I was going to need them to want to speak to me and send me stuff and whatever. And I just pissed off all of them in an instant, right? And I've hopefully never done that again. So the as is really a listening exercise where you take in that information with the caveat that people may have, kind of objectives that you're not aware of, right? For instance, I've been in the middle of a proxy fight and people have given me wrong information intentionally about what the as is, so I couldn't drive a larger optimization. Or I found out afterwards that there was a management buyout, and in interviewing those managers, they were lowballing everything that was happening, right? So if you put aside your circumspection of human nature, it really is a listening environment where you try not to give those solutions that is in your head as a consultant that you've seen a million times. And the reason why you don't try and do that is because you contaminate this assessment. And you also contaminate your potential result, right? Because if you're already solving in this stage, the basis from which you're going to measure your improvement is going to be higher than the one that it actually is. And so your success in your result is going to come out lower than what you wanted it to.
I want to make sure that we've got the key points of the playbook. We've got the as is. You talked about the where we want to get to. How are we going to measure? We'll get to the measurements. I know that's your favorite part. How are we getting to, as a business owner, my desired state? Because I don't necessarily know what should it look like. What does optimization look like then?
Once you've identified the processes that are the 80 for the 20 in that initial assessment, and you can change that prioritization throughout the process as you learn more, and as you drive the assumptions and the quantification to understand where the most value is. But once you've identified those initial ones, then you go and search for expertise, whether it be internal, whether it be through benchmarks, whether it be through a specialized consultant on that topic, right? To the narrowest degree, right? In order to understand what that to be can be. Because you as a business owner, you don't play in that area, that specific project all day, every day, right? You're there intermittently, but somebody else is spending, their life is consumed by trying to solve this problem. So you go find those people or those benchmarks, you go buy it, and then you understand within your own constraints as a company, right? Without unlimited money and unlimited resources, what your to-be can be. And you can be extravagant if you really wanted to, because there's an Airbnb exercise, right? Where they said, what does 1 out of 10 look like for a customer experience? What's 10 out of 10, right? And then they went on, right? They said, what does 11 out of 10 look like and 12 out of 10? And I think if I remember correctly, the ultimate conclusion of this was Richard Branson flies you there with a spaceship, right? To your ultimate Airbnb, shows you it and cooks you a meal or something like that, right? So you don't have to go there. You need to fit that with what is achievable within the constraint of your company. And that becomes your to-be objective once you've educated yourself about the realm of possibility of possible solutions. And at this time, you'll learn about a bunch of cool stuff out there, and it'll be very complex and sometimes overwhelming. So it takes a little time to pick through what that to-be looks like.
And I know sometimes it takes a lot of discussion. You talked about people raising their hand and saying, what is your pain point? What would you like to get rid of? What frustrates you on a daily basis? Yeah. As well as how many steps do we have in the process? How many steps can we take out? I know you and I are both very big fans of the minimalist theory.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And why are we fans of the minimalist theory? Because again, it occupies less of our attention, right? A process that's baked, automated, all of that, you know, it sometimes goes into insignificance, and then you can think about all the cool stuff, right? And so in terms of understanding just how complex it is, you work with those folks to detail it out, and that all happens under a work stream lead, right? And then those sub projects that you have, that as is in all its detailed steps, becomes a sub-project within a work stream that gets executed, then delivers part of the results in a high-low fashion that gets rolled up into the ultimate result of your optimization, which in turn, once you've gone through this exercise and you sit with all these awesome new SOPs and a true understanding of your business, you then go, I can't stop now, right? And then your brain goes to continuous optimization mindset, and you try and break everything in a Kaizen kind of manner, right? And that's when it really gets rolling, right? Once you've done this exercise, once you're kind of sort of addicted, right? Because you see the benefit, you see how it can work, and then you just hopefully kind of roll forward doing this for the rest of your company's existence.
You mentioned projects and sub-projects, and I know you've got some good thoughts on this, because picture back the war rooms. We go through these meetings, everyone's got it. We've got volumes of paper, and we have Post-it notes sitting all over a wall.
Yes.
You've got the 80-20. How are we organizing this? What do we attack? So we're doing them all. We're doing nothing.
Yes.
Where do we start, and how do we prioritize?
Absolutely. From the as is to the to be, you drive the gap analysis, describing in words what the difference is between the two and the initial assumptions about what needs to get done. That what needs to get done gets broken up into project milestones for that specific initiative. And it's important to break an initiative down really low, right? I always ask for task level detail. And my definition of a task is something that one person can do in less than 1 day, right? Because otherwise people give you these esoteric, we just need to build a house in this neighborhood in order to drive to the factory. And building a house is a complex task. So break it down into something that one person can do in one day. That then gets pulled into a larger project plan. But when that project plan gets too complex, people lose focus. So for each of those workstream leads, in that weekly meetup that you need to schedule to make sure that this project is on track, I normally ask for a workstream one-pager, right? And that is something that, I've redesigned a million times in my life. I've got a description of the workstream, everybody that's involved, the milestones, the project progress, the value creation, right? In terms of a high-low, the risks and the mitigation, right? Those are the key things that I ask for because I cannot, as the project manager, drive the minutiae of each sub-project. And if something comes up there that appears to be a problem, that's when you double-click, go in, interview the specific owner of that project, which is not necessarily a workstream leader who is executing to achieve the 2B environment.
So we've got where we're at, where we want to get to, what's that gap in between. We've narrowed it down to the milestones and the simplest of tasks. There is nothing more satisfying than checking something off of a list. So I appreciate that it's narrowed down to one thing that I can do. I can check off one thing a day.
Yeah.
Now I know your favorite part, which comes out of every CEO's mouth that we talk to is, how do I know it's working? How am I measuring this? And the biggest question we get is what am I measuring and how am I measuring it?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And you're right. I'm very excited about it. I'll say that for me, the most important part of all of this is getting the assumptions that drive the value creation correct, right? Sometimes it can be weird stuff. Let's take an example, right? Like you're improving your manufacturing line, right? Throughput times quantity, right? So if you know that your throughput is going to increase, right? And quantity is going to increase, those are easy things to measure, but it's not always that apparent, right? We had to do airline meals for a major airline and measure that. And it ended up being basically how many bottles of Voss water are they serving to first class until we cut the Voss water and nobody complained, right? So it becomes, finding the right assumptions to build your value creation is key, right? That's one. And that's mostly expressed in a dollar term, right? Especially even if you take a quantifiable thing like throughput times quantity, you convert that into a dollar using, COGS. The second part is you can also use whatever KPI or OKR or whatever system you use that describes that process for yourself. And I think a way to think about this is the CAR methodology that you use to put on your CV, right? Context, action, result, right? This is all that this boils down to, right? So you're trying to say, I saved $5 million in 16 days by doing X, Y, and Z, right? Changing these variables and parameters, right? And not only is that an analogy that works, it's also invaluable if you're a consultant approaching this problem, right? Because how you quantify what this optimization initiative dropped out is super important, right? So being clear about the variables is important. And then what's interesting is that when something goes off track, right? When it's behind schedule or something bad is happening, it's by digging into those variables within those assumptions that you can start understanding exactly what the point is that went awry, right? And sometimes you find a bladder of hydrochlorium sulfide that burst, and that was the variable, right? Or you found somebody left a tap open, or they went for lunch during a controller review, right? It can be crazy things, but the lower your assumptions can be, the more detailed your assumptions can be, the better your quantifications can be. Would you like me to talk about the pull through to the P&L and the balance?
Apps. I don't know any CEO who's looking at one measurement without looking at the P&L.
So at the end of the day, you can have all these fantastic conjecture kind of like conversations about, oh, I delivered this and it's fantastic and the project's going really well and all the dashboards are green and it's fantastic. But if it doesn't show up in the P&L balance sheet, financial forecast, it doesn't exist, right? So how do you do that, right? So as you build this assessment scorecard, there is an estimation of high, low value. there is an estimation of whether it's one-off or ongoing, and there's an estimation of whether there are investment dollars associated with achieving that objective. Sometimes you need to buy a new piece of software or whatever to achieve what you wanted to do process optimization-wise. And many people struggle to pull that through to the P&L. But if you have that innovation portfolio and you've calculated the assumed benefit from this initiative, you have a value that has to be tracked through to some P&L account, right? Or something is missing in the middle, right? There's another iteration of the process or whatever. And so by giving that innovation portfolio with its timings to your CFO or financial forecaster, they in turn are able to update the financial forecast to integrate the optimization that you are now doing, that you have a great plan for and that you're committed to do other than whatever risk may come up. So that direct translation and the constant reconciliation between the innovation portfolio and the actuals is key and is the ultimate measure of whether you're successful or not.
You've mentioned a number of components, number of individuals. You just mentioned we want to pull it through the financials. We need to have our finance individual involved. CEO is looking at it. They're ultimately responsible. We've got individuals involved in these meetings.
Yes.
Posted in the chat in LinkedIn. Would love to hear comments on individuals who have joined afterwards. Any questions for Pieter, but also, and I'm going to pose this to you, Pieter, who owns this? You've got a lot of moving parts, and this is where we see it fall through the most.
Yeah.
And then we'll wrap it up with some advice and tips and takeaways here. But from your experience, who inside the organization and or outside the organization, do you put in do you have a project champion? Do you have it by department? Yes. How do you organize that ownership to make sure that this isn't the flavor of the day?
I love it. You know I love that question. And I have a twofold answer for you. First, your project sponsor needs to be the most senior person you can possibly rope in to support you, right? Chairman of the board is preferable, right? But that's not always going to happen. So the CEO or the CFO, etc., because at some point people are going to resist this process, and you need that authority in order to say, hey, this is useful, this has to happen, this is going to benefit the company. The inverse is also true. Who do you assign to run this, right? Because that's going to be important to the project sponsor to understand that this initiative has a reasonable chance of success, and you'll have to explain your plan for achieving that reasonable chance of success. So once you go through this interview, you find that there are certain people within the organization that know the process the best, that understands how it integrates with the rest of the company, those really kind of like golden resources that we've all come across, right? And sometimes there aren't. Sometimes the process is so broken, you have to go look outside. For the internal ones, it's very important to try and lock them down with your sponsor's support for this project, right? And you are going to have to backfill people, right, in order to do this and do this initiative, because it's not going to do itself in somebody's spare time, right? And so there's going to be a little bit of project cost. And I think when you and I have spoken this previously, I mentioned that ideally all those internal resources are 100% assigned to this project. And I know you weren't the biggest fan of that, but the reason I said that, right, is that if your company is firefighting the whole time, fires will occur. And who do they go to fight the fires? The best person, right? So if you've got somebody helping you 50 or 25% on this whole initiative that's going to change the company, it's more likely than not that they will be pulled into some craziness that's happening or some meltdown that's occurred. And that discipline, keeping those folks out of that daily crisis and pointing to the crisis and say, hey guys, this is exactly why we're doing this, so please leave us alone, right? That is as important as any sponsorship that you have from CEO or CFO.
And this is why I posted that question in the LinkedIn chat, knowing how debatable it can be. All right, as we kind of pull this together here, as someone is looking at process improvement, they want to automate, they want to either automate through optimization. There's always a starting point and an ending point here. What are some tangible takeaways that you would give?
The first one is most of us know when something is painful, right? And processes don't have to be painful. If you've done the work in optimizing it, and to your own knowledge, it's working as well as it could, it's scalable, and you can move on to other things because you've done your work in that area. So most of us can recognize that there's an inefficiency, right? And I think when you recognize that inefficiency, ask yourself, are you equipped to deal with this? Or do you need some extra assistance, whether internal or external, right? Once you've made that decision and you have a semblance of a team, having a framework to attack this, the framework's simple, right? I mean, it's a spreadsheet. It starts with a spreadsheet, all the pain points, all the different variables, and a weighted decision matrix on prioritization, right? Culminating in a financial estimate of high and low, what this could deliver together with some risks. And then structuring it with the sponsor and the resources so that it has a reasonable chance of success, because many optimization plans have died. And if you just so all of this is the same, whether you do an acquisition, whether you do a restructure, whether you do a divestiture or whatever, it's all the same work, right? And the stat is what, Kristen, 70% of kind of acquisition integrations fail. Why do they fail? Because this doesn't happen, right? And so kind of having that ability to really kind of like bite at it and go with it is key with a framework. Making sure that the results hit the P&L and balance sheet, right? Otherwise, these are just stories that you tell your grandkids, and you're never going to get recognition for this or monetary benefit, or the company's not going to grow, scale, or exit, or anything like that. And then once you've done this, right, and you've seen what this can deliver, and many people have done pieces of this, then really getting invigorated by that, building that in as your standard operating process of how you do the company, that whole continuous improvement, let's break stuff, right, and then rebuild it in the best possible way. That becomes a way of life.
I love, Peter, you're giving some people heart palpitations when they're thinking, I'm intentionally trying to break things that I don't need to. They're just breaking on their own. I think it's the signs that you need to optimize your operations. They're breaking on their own when you're not trying to break them.
Yes.
And when anyone says to me, I can't backfill this position, it takes X number of months to train, you're not scalable. If any
100%.
person in your company cannot be trained within a matter of hours or days, depending on what their scope of responsibility is, it's not scalable. And I love what you say, it needs to be broken down into smaller bits and chunks.
We had a benchmark, or we had a process at Procter & Gamble. We were running business services, follow the sun, right? So 3 8-hour shifts in 3 global locations, right? So you could hand over and do or support all of them, and technically for key problems do work at 3 times the speed, right? And so the theory, the predication that we built this on was that we could lift somebody from Manila, drop them in San Jose, Costa Rica, and they could get started within 5 minutes because they would know exactly what to do, right? And for a new hire, start them on a basic process that was documented so well, with such good training, that they could be up and running on day one with doing something concrete. They didn't have to go through some 1 week kind of like warm and fuzzy kind of like company. They could do something concrete on day one. So it can be done. It has been done by thousands of corporations.
I love it. Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing. I know that you and I could go on for hours, so we'll adjust the conversation. We'll meet everyone on LinkedIn, as well as I encourage you to reach out to Pieter. Probably one of the most amazing individuals I know. Ask questions, share philosophies. Please engage. This is a conversation starter, is why we have these, so we can understand who are the experts in the room, what do we want to know, and how do we close our knowledge gap. I love it. This is the what do we know, what do we want to get to, and Pieter, you certainly are that person to help that close that gap on optimizing operations, scaling, and I've never walked away from a conversation where I didn't learn something for you. So thank you so much for joining us as our resident expert today.
Thank you, Kristen, and always enjoy the conversations with you and the team.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us, everyone, taking a few moments of your day, and we will see you and continue the conversation on LinkedIn. Take care.